Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to our 7th and final webinar of our 2021-2022 series. Today, our psychologist, Dr. Sam Jeannite, is going to talk to us about bullying, about being bullied, about how parents can support their kids. I am Mandy White-Ajmani. I am the owner of Small Brooklyn Psychology. We are a group psychology practice in Industry City in Brooklyn, New York, where we offer therapy and neuropsychological assessment to people of all ages, all backgrounds, all psychological concerns. You can see all of our clinicians at the bottom there. They're pretty spectacular, I have to say. So that's me in the left-hand corner, then Dr. Natasha Brown, Jill DePietro, Dr. Sam Jeannite, Dr. Deidre Edwards, Dr. Nav Gill, Dr. Ben Jeannite, Maddie Lawler, and Dr. Danielle DeFilippo. We all have experience working with people from across the lifespan, but we also have very special training and experience to do assessments and treatment with children and parents, even down to babies and toddlers. So as I said, this is our final webinar in this year's monthly series. I'm really proud of all the content that we've created over the past 2 years. It spans so many different topics, from tips on managing behavior at home and in a classroom, to what a neuropsychological evaluation is and how it helps, to how to understand mental health issues in children and adults, to how to take care of yourselves as parents. It's been really important to us to be able to get this information out to the community. And so I'm so glad that we've been able to amass such a library. And so all of the recordings for our previous talks are available for free on our website at smallbrooklyn.com/services/talks. Now, all of our talks have been media sponsored by Park Slope Parents, which is our amazing local community resource. If you're a parent in Brooklyn and you're not on Park Slope Parents, I highly recommend it. The email lists, the in-person meetups, all of the different Zoom sessions that they've been doing, they've been super instrumental in just helping to bring people together, especially during COVID. It's been so instrumental. It's been personally helpful for me as a parent, but then also as in my career and small business owner. So thank you very much for Park Slope Parents. Now, during this talk, if you have any questions, I want you to type them to me in the Q&A box. I'm going to monitor the questions as Sam talks, and then we're going to come back together for a conversation after the main talk. So now I'm going to introduce Sam Jeannite. He has worked with kids in so many different settings, and he has a lot to share about his experience in working with bullying. So Samuel Jeannite, PsyD, is a licensed clinical psychologist. He completed his doctorate in school psychology, clinical child psychology at Pace University. Before joining us at Small Brooklyn Psychology, Sam had previously worked at various hospitals, residential treatment facilities, and therapeutic schools. He has lots of experience in working with people of all ages with a wide range of difficulties, including complex trauma, anxiety, depression, developmental disorders, poor emotion regulation, conduct disorder, ADHD, poor social skills, and executive function difficulties. In his therapy, he integrates many different approaches as needed for each child, including CBT, trauma-focused CBT, DBT skills, and psychodynamic therapy, all mixed in with his humor and a love of sneakers and superheroes. And I often hear from families who say that their kids who've never been able to connect to a therapist before. Sam manages to keep them engaged and open to change, which is pretty awesome. Sam is also an adjunct professor at Pace University, a dad to a toddler, and in all his spare time is also a published book author and illustrator. So Sam, I'm going to turn off my video here and you take it away.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Mandy. I'm hoping to be able to talk to you today about bullying. The title of this topic is Bullying, What Can Parents Do? So I'm hoping that today's talk will be informative and clear as possible, and maybe during the Q&A section, we could talk in more detail as to what specific situations, how to address different situations as they come along. Sorry, just making sure I could. There you go. All right. So a little bit about me. I have many years worked at different schools from K to 12. I've dealt with various situations involving bullying, and I've led and trainings and on anti-bullying, and have implemented school-wide strategies to various effect. I say various effect because I've seen situations where it has been helpful, and I've seen situations where it hasn't been helpful. And and I have many stories about that, but it forced me to kind of look at bullying in different ways, to kind of understand the different avenues and different reasons why, there are some programs, or some people say, programs are great, and other people say, programs are not very useful, and to kind of see the different logic between those two different things. So I'm hoping to kind of maybe put some of those things together so that way I could make it as comprehensive as possible. What I've learned, everyone has a slightly different definition of bullying. It is important to understand the context in various situations. There's always context, right? I think sometimes when we hear a story, we just jump and say, oh my God, that's horrible, like this can't happen. And then once you start to kind of get to the finer details of what happened, we start to realize that things are not always what we think they should be. There's no standard solution that works for every situation. Sometimes it feels like there should be cookie cutter solutions, like, something bad happens, a consequence. But then oftentimes when that happens, we kind of avoid looking at the deeper issues, right? What if a child is dealing with a lot of anxiety? What if there are things going on at home? What if there are other dynamics that we're not aware of? Those are issues that kind of pop up from time to time, and we should be aware of those issues and try to kind of take that into consideration when dealing with any situation, whether it's bullying or the mental health or whatever it is. We kind of need to understand the nuance. All right, so in short, what is bullying? I was looking at a lot of different definitions, and some of them vary based on legal websites and journal articles. But what I found to be most comprehensive is bullying is unwanted aggressive behavior that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. The behavior is repeated or has the potential to be repeated over time. When looking at this definition, sometimes I think to myself, well, they leave a lot of room for interpretation. What we want to kind of, at least for me and what I've been always focused on, like, we want to make the difference or distinguishing between an actual bullying event versus something that is conflict, right? Things happen naturally in life. People deal with conflict, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But there are times when there are bullying events, where there are situations that look and feel like harassment. And when you look deeper into it, we're like, yeah, this is not okay. There's something going on here. We need to address this. So with bullying, there's an imbalance of physical and or psychological power that exists between the individuals involved. And that balance of power it has to be there. I think that's an important part, right? Because I think sometimes there are people who, it's important to defend yourself, but sometimes there are people who don't have the resources right now to be able to do that. So how do you go about doing that? The negative behavior must be repeated. It should be repeated. And when they say the potential to be repeated, that's important, right? I think that kind of leaves it open to interpretation. But what happens is, when we're talking about has the ability to be, if it's like something very negative and it's constantly happening, and whenever something happens, that another person has the opportunity to say something or do something that's negatively affecting a child or a person in any form or fashion, that's a problem. There must be deliberate intention to hurt somebody, and the negative action must be largely unprovoked, right? Again, this is why we have to look at the nuance. I think there were many situations, and I remember many teachers coming to me and saying things like, well, so-and-so is bullying so-and-so. And I said, okay, let's go find out what's going on. Let's go, let me know what happened. Give me the full detail. Tell me what happened in the beginning, what happened in the middle, what happened afterwards. How long has it been happening? Has it happened before? Does it happen in your presence? Does it happen when your back is turned? Things like that. And then when I go talk with the students, I find out, that things are not simply just, so-and-so is picking on so-and-so, or this fight happened, or this situation happened. And I find out that, things become more nuanced. And the kid that, I remember there was a particular situation that the kid that was being perceived as the bully was actually, and he was becoming more aggressive, was the kid that was actually being verbally taunted, and how do we address that, right? So everybody's looking at the physical aggression and other things, and then they weren't really paying attention to the dynamics in the class that was contributing to some of the issues that were happening with that child in that moment. So when we were able to address that, we we're like, okay, well, this is not bullying. This is still a problem. Let's figure this out. Okay. Oftentimes with bullying, you might see, let me just double check. All right, skip the depression. You'll see things like depression, right? So these are things to watch out for. This does not always happen. There are times, there are good times and bad times in any person's life. There are days where you wake up and you feel fantastic. You're on top of the world for no apparent reason other than the fact that you woke up today. And there are days that you wake up and you're like, another day. And this happens with kids too. Well, like, you know, even my young daughter, when we take her to day school, I was like, time to go to school. And she's like, no, I don't. And she's 2 years old. So I'm like, I'm hoping that's not a pattern that continues. But I know, and there are some days where she's like, oh, I can't wait to see my teacher. I can't wait. Like, oh, I'm going to school. And it happens. So either way, I stay calm, I observe her. But what happens is when children start to develop like some real serious mental health difficulties, you'll see problems at school. So you'll see their grades start to suffer. You'll see friendships start to suffer. You see that they're no longer calling people, or they're coming home and they're unhappy. And when you wake them up almost every single day, it's not just like, oh, I hate school. Like that, you know, most kids have that at one point or another, but it's like a deep, like dreading, like, I don't want to go, anything but that. Those are things to watch out for. Changes in eating or sleeping. Are they sleeping well? Are they oversleeping? Are they trying to say, oh, my stomach hurts, and every day there's something going on? My ankle hurts, my head hurts, my eyes hurt, I can't feel my fingers. Whatever it is that might come up, then all of a sudden you're noticing there's a pattern of this avoidance, feelings of sadness and hopelessness. Can't really find another solution to a problem. They can't look at they can't look at the bright side. It's like, oh yeah, I can't, like what's the point of doing anything? There's no point in me going to school. Like, I have to go to school anyway. No big, like that type of talk we need to address. Lack of interest, low energy levels are important, and irritability. I think that's a big marker with kids who are depressed, is like irritability that kind of pops up. And you'll see it, like you'll say, well, they doesn't seem depressed. They seem very irritable. But then when you start to look at the behaviors and you look at the constellation of behaviors, you're like, oh, I could see what's happening. They just don't feel good. They're not very happy. And I don't know if you could think of times when you might have felt sad or depressed. There is a certain level of irritability, like every poor frustration tolerance, inability to deal with any stress of any kind. Those are things that tend to pop up. Anxiety about the future. With anxiety, fear of being away from the parent, not wanting to break away. Again, physical symptoms, sweat, dizziness, sometimes panic attacks for little things or even big things. You just have a panic attack and unable to really deal with whatever stress is going on. School refusal on extreme situations, or kind of refusing to go to school, kind of hemming and hawing, making it difficult for them to get ready, and pervasive worrying about anything, worried that mom, something might happen to mom, something might happen to dad, something might happen to their friends. And it's not like these worries happen, like things happen. Like there are times in life where, you know, you might have a period of a couple of days or even weeks where things are like you feel off, right? But then when you're talking about pervasive worry, we're talking about it's constant. Like we're not really getting away from it. It's getting worse. It's like a buzzing that kind of continues, and that's where we need to kind of be worried about. And then when we talk about ideation, we talk about, so like, and this is extreme situations, right? But things to watch out for: if there's a focus on death or dying, if there's increased risk taking. Even in even young children, I think there's studies on it and research articles on it, and it's not perfect, but what they're looking at is like whether the child is doing things that are extremely dangerous, and they kind of know it's dangerous, but they're like jumping off of tables and trying to hurt themselves, or doing things that we're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Maybe they're not saying that they're actively trying to hurt themselves, but they're doing things that are dangerous. Those are things to watch out for. Social isolation, not wanting to talk with friends, not wanting to communicate, making it very hard to communicate. Those things are that pop up, and we should be aware of that. And talk of suicide and hopelessness is important to be aware of. So those are things that could come from bullying. I mean, there are other things that could come from that, and there are kind of different levels of that, right? Because I'm sure people experience in their life different levels of teasing or maybe even bullying in their life, and it didn't feel good. It didn't feel great. We've dealt with it. There are times when we were very successful in dealing with it. There are times when we come up with the perfect comeback, or we say the right thing, or we do the right thing. And there are times when we look back on it and we're like, wow, I wish I could have done that differently. I wish that situation didn't happen. And that affected the way we feel about ourselves. So the next thing that hold on. All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, before we get into different like strategies and different ways to address it. I want to talk about common bullying beliefs, right? And I think they're important. We're not going to talk about every single one, but we should talk about some of them, all right? Bullying is a natural part of childhood. Now, I want to be very specific about that, right? Conflict and difficulty is a natural part of childhood, right? We deal with conflict. There are arguments that happen. I can remember arguments that happen with people that are still friends, or family members who are still friends with now. That was like, oh yeah, I remember we were arguing about that, or we had a problem with that. That's a part of life, right? But when we're talking about situations of like harassment, of a continual like digging in, and then you felt like there was hopelessness and you couldn't get out of that, that is not really a natural part of life. It does happen, and we want to address that, and we want to find ways to address that and get out of it. But if, for example, you find yourself in, or if you can remember a time where there were periods of time where you felt that things were not going okay, and you felt like you had nobody to turn to. And sometimes you might realize, even till this day, or even for a period of time, even after the situation is over with, it still bothers you. You still think about it. You still kind of refer back to it. Those are things that you should be aware of. So bullying is a natural part of life or childhood. I don't really agree with that. And again, it's a distinction, right? Not everything is sunshine and roses. But if things are bad, then we should be observant of that. Words will never hurt. Again, in doing research for this and talking about it, you're right. Sticks and stones, it can break my bones, but words should never hurt me. To a certain degree is correct, right? But I'm a therapist. I deal with words all the time. We teach our kids to use our words instead of using our fists. Words can hurt. And there are things I know that somebody could say to me randomly, it's fine. Okay, you said that, fine. But there are things that people can say that can hurt. And they can hurt, and they could hurt bad. Now, we want to build resilience. We want to be able to deal with this despite those things that were said. You could kind of say, well, what is my worth? Right? And I think even in therapy, oftentimes I talk with kids or even adults, and I say, okay, so this is what happened. I hear what happened. I hear that you're sad or frustrated about this particular situation. But I want to know from you, what do you think about yourself? Do you think you are those things? Do you think that you are worthless or other things? And when the person says, no, I'm not worthless, I says, okay, so let's work from there, right? So words can hurt, right? Some people deserve to be bullied. That again, people don't deserve to be bullied. Now, again, there are situations that happen, and we could talk about nuanced situations, but people don't deserve that, right? And we want to kind of keep away from that type of thinking. Bullying make kids tougher. I don't agree with that, at least to a certain degree. I think it has the potential to a certain degree, but again, I think conflict make kids tougher, right? Dealing with stress, dealing with things that happen, arguments, issues at school, like that. Okay, that makes kids tougher, but active bullying doesn't. I feel like it kind of makes a person who's like a really spiky egg on the outside, right? Very spiky. Oh, I can't touch that. I can't grab that. Oh, they're pretty tough. But then once you break through that spikiness, then it's kind of yolky on the inside. right? And we don't want that. If you want to be tough, you want our kids to be resilient. We want them to be resilient from the inside out, right? So not just kind of a fake resilience, right? And I've seen that. I've seen people who bolster and they're like, I'm great, I'm fantastic, look at all my achievements. But as soon as you start poking holes, all of a sudden they start falling apart, right? So then what we want to do is that we want to kind of help a person develop the ability to, when holes are being poked, they're not falling apart. When holes are being poked, they're repairing themselves, right? So that's how we want to kind of consider it. And bullying doesn't help that. It kind of makes it so that way the person doesn't freaks the person out, makes them, even if you decide to, you do something drastic to stop it, but then now you've learned that in order to stop certain things, you have to be drastic. You have to be aggressive. You have to do this. And that's not the best way to live our lives as we're growing up. Bullying is easy to recognize, not often true. Oftentimes kids could be going through things for a very long period of time and they won't say anything. I even remember personally, and I can remember in one particular situation that till this day, I don't think I've ever mentioned it to my parents. And it was like an entire year of it. And I didn't like it. And I didn't know what my parents could have done. And in the end, it's like, okay, it happened. It is what it is. I grew from it. I developed from it. But at the same time, I was like, wow, I didn't tell anybody. Wow. And nobody recognized it. And I don't think anybody recognized it. So it's important to be vigilant. Ignoring bullying will make it go away. That's not always true. Sometimes it does, but for the most part, it kind of amplifies it. If nobody does anything about it, then everybody thinks it's okay. Children and youth who bully are mostly loners with few social skills. Not always true. Depending on where you grew up with, depending on your situation, you'll find that in some situations you have bullies who are loners or people who bully. Now, I don't want to say bullies. I don't want to kind of put a label on it. If I have been putting a label on it, forgive me for that. People who bully are not always loners in social skills. Like if people who are loners tend to kind of regress, they kind of withdraw, right? Because what we find is that if you are mean to people, and you're mean to everybody, nobody really wants to be your friend, and that's normal, right? You have to be nice to people. But what I've also found is in certain situations, there might be groups of kids where it's like, oh, it's cool to say these things or to say this or to do that or to have fun in that way. And they think it's teasing or whatever it is. And then now that person is pretty popular. So everybody wants to be on that kid's good side. And then if you get on that kid's bad side, or if you get in this group's bad side, or if you do this one thing that nobody likes, all of a sudden that person is being targeted, right? So that's not an always kind of perfect thing that happens. So we want to be aware of that. Bully kids need to learn how to deal with bullying on their own. Again, to a certain degree, they should be learning how to deal with it on their own, but are we giving them the resources? Are we teaching them how to do that? Like, it's one thing to say, a kid comes in, is like, yeah, for 3 months, so-and-so has been doing this to me and I really hate it and it's really messing with my head. And then you're like, okay, well, and I don't think that's what you're going to do, but you're like, well, here's some strategies, go ahead. You want to talk with them. You want to understand what's going on. And then we'll talk more about that. I don't know, I'm having some difficulty with my slide. Hopefully it pops back up. There you go. Yes. All right, and we'll go here. If my child is being bullied, it's okay for them to fight back. Again, we want to kind of get very nuanced about that. We want to get to a certain place of understanding what the context of the situation is and where do we go with that. Typically fighting back doesn't always help, because like I told you in that story earlier, that kid who was fighting back, now that kid is being looked at as the aggressive one. Mind you, a lot of things were happening that were not okay. And when we looked at the full detail of it, yes, it's not okay to be aggressive. But then now, if that kid doesn't have the resources to kind of say, okay, these are other options, and they think that the only option they have is to be aggressive, then it just looks bad on them, and it just becomes more of a problem. And then now the child is learning that, even when they try to protect themselves, nobody's backing them up. And cyberbullying is less harmful, and cyberbullying is a big issue, and it gets worse in it gets pretty bad in middle school. It's not great in high school. And there are times, and it's very difficult to kind of keep tabs on it, to kind of find out who's doing who or saying what. And oftentimes it's like, well, listen, the only thing we can do is not go on that website or not do this. But oftentimes kids they can't help it. They're like, they said this about me, I'm going to do that. Or I've been in situations where they says, yeah, I don't like so-and-so's outfit today. They wore purple this, and they wore this particular thing, and they wore that particular thing. And I'm like, wow, they're referring specifically about somebody. And then when you bring them in, it's like, why did you say that? It's like, I wasn't talking about so-and-so. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And it becomes this very difficult and amorphous thing. So it's important to kind of be aware of that too, and how it can affect each other. So after all of that, what I wanted to get to is conflict is a natural part of life. People deal with conflict, okay? And bullying is a form of conflict, but it's not the conflict that we want, right? We want, if there's interpersonal issues, we want our child to learn how to deal with it. If there are issues going on in the classroom, we want their child to learn how to go with it. If there are things that are happening, we want our child to learn how to deal with those things. But then if things get to a point where they feel helpless, they feel like they have no choice, they feel as if when they go to school, there's nobody watching their back, and something is happening that's making them feel uncomfortable. And they've tried all the different ways you've talked to them about, and things are not changing. Then, we have to kind of start considering, when do we jump in? When do we say something? And again, that's very tricky. And I'm not going to give you a full, well, this is exactly what you should do. And then you could call the teachers. Now, I'm not going to give you a rubric on that, because I want you to be very careful as to what can happen. Because, so I've seen situations where the parents go to the teachers, and then now the child is ostracized. And then now it's like, oh my goodness, now how do we fix that? Or this problem happens, how do we fix that? Sometimes it could be problematic. So we have to kind of be very careful as to how we address the problem, but not allowing the problem to get to the point where now the child feels as if there is nothing we can do to fix it. All right, so parents should try to consider, it is not helpful to intervene at the first sign of interpersonal stress with peers. All right, if there's an issue, if there's a problem, jumping in and talking with the teachers about an incident, unless it's a very severe and serious incident, then I'm sure people come up with a million different reasons as to why they would do that. It is not a good idea to just do that. It's better to just talk with your child and find out what's going on, get context, find out about the situation, find out if there's a misunderstanding. Miscommunications happen in life. How many times did I can think of a million times I've said something and somebody across the room was like, what did you say? And I said this, that. And then they're like, oh, I thought you said this. And I was like, wow, like I would never say that. Or no, that's not what I was referring to, or whatever it is. But in that moment, that was almost the precipitate, almost, if I did say that, or if there was a major miscommunications, which I've been in, then all of a sudden things get bad. And then we want to be addressed that, understand the context of the situation, understand the perspective of your child. That's also important. We have to understand where our child is at mentally. There are some kids who are very socially savvy, who seem to understand, friendships and nuances, and oftentimes to their detriment, because now you're like, wow, I worked with kids who, they're pretty young, and yet they're kind of coming to me with stuff that I'm like, yeah, this is like middle school level of nuance that we're talking about. But then, and then they're finding it hard to interact with other kids because they're on this level and other kids are not on that level. And how do we kind of bridge the gap between that? So understanding where your child is at, understanding the perspective. So my slide is changing. Hopefully you can see it. I think it just takes a second for it to pop up. I don't know if let's see what happens here. All right. So here it is. Let's build resiliency. So if you want to help intervene with a child who's dealing with bullying or anything in life, right? Because I like to say, or what I've been taught is not everything lasts forever, right? Things change over time. You don't like your school this year, you'll get a different teacher next year. You don't like this job, you have the ability to change a job. So things change, but then what can you do now to kind of develop the resiliency you need to deal with it? You cannot accommodate every single need, right? If the child says jump, you can't say, well, how high? Or what do you need me to do? I need what? Like, we need to be able to address like what is an accommodation and what is not really an accommodation. What are things that, child does need help with, right? But if it's something that you're noticing is causing them anxiety, if there's a situation where you realize that you're doing it because it makes a child anxious or frustrated or whatever it is, and it's just easier for you to deal with it than to kind of help them deal with it, then you're accommodating. So what we want to do is we want to avoid accommodating every problem. We want to avoid trying to kind of fix every problem for them, because they will not learn how to fix problems on their own. And that's going to be a problem down the road, right? And we don't want that. We don't want kids who don't know how to fix issues or don't know how to deal with when somebody said something that was mean. Okay, they said something that was mean. Is it true? No. Okay, so how do we deal with that moving forward? Here are your choices. And to be able to exercise those choices, that's important. And to be empowered to exercise those choices is important. Avoid eliminating all risk, right? There are things that are going to be risky. You can't protect for everything, right? Avoid like there are going to be times when you're going to send your kid, it's like, when this happens again, this is what I would like you to say, or this is what I like you to do, and try. And if they didn't do it, okay, what happened? Like, you were scared, you were frustrated, you got really angry, whatever happened, but you don't want to kind of eliminate risk completely. You want your child to learn how to deal with stress in different ways. Build problem-solving skills, which is really important, right? You want your kids to kind of learn how to think through a problem, look at an issue, look at a situation, and to kind of break it down, right? I think like my wife and I, what we love to see so much is when, even though it's not the greatest thing, because it's like, how do we praise her? Like, let's say we don't want her to grab the cookies on top of the jar, so we push it all the way back. So then now we're watching her, and she's kind of troubleshooting, and she's kind of tapping her finger like, what do I do? Then she gets a bucket, and then she does this, then she grabs that, then she grabs a stick, and then she kind of pushes it, and then we're like, wow, that's amazing problem solving skills. You still can't have the cookies, but amazing problem solving skills. And we're trying to figure out a way to kind of balance those two things out. But we want her to learn how to solve problems. We want her to kind of deal with problems and to think it through. And if she makes a mistake, that's okay as well. Mistakes should be made. We can't not allow mistakes to occur. Demonstrate concrete skills, and we'll talk about that, right? But demonstrating concrete skills are super important. We need to kind of be very, like, there are times when we're like, you should know this, or you should do this. We've gone over this 100 times, but oftentimes we need to kind of break it down to the most basic level and say, hey, let's start here. This is what we can do. Where does it become difficult for you? Where does it become easy for you? What do you think you can manage, and what do you think you can't manage? Don't provide all the answers. Lead up to it. Allow them to provide the answers. Oftentimes, it's great in therapy when I tell, like you say, just give me advice. And I said, okay, I could give you advice, or we could come up with an advice that works for you. And when that happens and the person comes, it's like, well, I can do this. And I was like, wow. If it came from me, it would just be something somebody else told you. But when it came from you, you started to think, oh, I have the ability. Avoid developing learned helplessness, right? We want to teach choices. We want to teach that even though things might seem hopeless, there's always opportunities. There are always things that can be done. Mistakes are not always bad. Learn to manage your emotions is very important. And that's a big thing. I think with a lot of kids, not all kids, but many kids, the emotional management is quite difficult. I've seen kids who are so emotionally closed off. So they're like, yeah, everything is perfectly fine. Nothing seems to bother them. And then you start to notice, like, yeah, things bother them. It's just they've learned somehow along the way, I need to shut everything down. And while other kids, everything bothers them. You look at them in, like, the wrong way. All of a sudden they get very anxious and get very frustrated. So the idea is that we want to learn emotional management. We want to learn When is it safe to be emotional? When is it safe not to be? Or what do we do when we feel this way? What do we do when we feel angry? What do we do when we feel anxious or frustrated? Like, there are options, right? And when you think about that, when you start to not just know that there are options, but really know in your heart, like, oh, there are options. I can do this. I can do that. I don't know if anybody could kind of attest to this, but there are times when, you'll hear about a bad situation or you hear about a problem, and then your immediate reaction is to freak out. And then once you calm down, once you think the situation through, then you're like, oh, okay, I could do this, I could do that, or this is where I could get the money from, or it's not so bad. As a matter of fact, this works to my benefit, right? Because now you're allowing yourself to calm down. So what the idea is that you're showing that to your child. And that's the next thing too. You have to show that to your child. You have to model behavior, which is a big thing. So strategy that works really well, and I can't stress it enough, and sometimes parents kind of not go far at it, but they'll say, okay, yeah, we could role play. I don't know if it's going to work. Or even kids in therapy, I'll say, all right, let's do a role play, and they're like, ha ha ha, I don't want to do that. Like, that's corny. What happens is role play can be extremely effective, especially when done well. I can remember when I was becoming an RA many years ago, not that many years ago, but many enough, over a decade ago. I maybe 15. I was becoming an RA, and for the first time, and I was excited and everything. And they were doing a training, and then they did this particular training where they purpose, and I don't know if other schools do this, instead of just sitting us down and tell us, this is what you do when you walk into a room and you find drugs, or this is what you do when you walk into a room and find this problem. They literally staged it with the other RAs. They staged everything, and they had us go from room to room and act it out. And it was funny, it was weird, it was dramatic, it was a little crazy at times. But then I remember a situation happening and walking in, and the first thought I had was, what did I practice during the role play? And then more or less, I was able to deal with that situation, because I was just like, if I didn't know what was going on, or if I didn't pay attention during the PowerPoint presentation, I would have been like, okay, all right, carry on, guys. And then go call my supervisors and freak out and say, this is happening. But then once because of the role play, I was able to determine, like, oh, I have an option. This is what I can do. This is what I could do. And it made it easier. It made it so that way the practice allowed me to deal with that situation, and I was able to do whatever I need to do. So role plays can work. Practice various situations. Practice current situations. Teach that there are different options. Play to your child's strength, right? There are some kids who are very socially gifted. So you play to that strength. You teach them, what do we say next? What can you say next? There are kids who are not, right? So what are they good at? They're good at ignoring people. So let's say, all right, so how are we going to use your ignoring powers? What are we going to do here? What are we going to do there? And then when you're able to kind of do that and be as very dramatic, but also as real as possible, you'll be able to address some of these difficulties. Another strategy is scaffolding. Not all children are emotionally ready to handle difficult social situations. Know your kid, know your child, know the child that you're working with. There are some kids who are able to handle difficult emotional situations, and there are some kids who don't have the ability yet, right? You have to be aware of that. If your kid has a lot of difficulty dealing with social difficulty, bullying, or any type of aggression, or whatever it is that's going on, then let's talk about, like, where are they at? How do they deal with it? Understand their perspective, understand their point of view, understand what's going on. And then from there, once you meet them where they're at, then you can start building from there. You start addressing, like, okay, so how do we fix this problem? How do we address that? If you can't deal with a person saying mean things to you, what can we do to help you with that? Really kind of pinpointing the problem and addressing it. Okay, so you're scaffolding, you're kind of helping them. You're not making it too easy for them, but at the same time, you haven't let go of their hand. And then the ultimate goal is that you'll get to the point where you can let go, and then they'll be able to do it on their own. But it takes steps, and there are different nuances to it, but we could talk more about that. There were questions and whatnot. So if your child is bullying, On the other hand, there are things I want you to understand. Like, let's identify the cognitive distortions. Basically, these are like irrational thoughts or irrational ideas that people have about themselves, and that we could go into a whole other presentation about that. But I put it in there because I want you to hopefully look it up and talk about it. But you want to look to see what's happening. Is there difficulty with empathy, right? Some kids have a hard time with empathy, and that's okay. We could try to teach that. We could try to force, like, work our way into learning about empathy. Do they disregard or distort the impact of their behavior? Some kids don't realize what they're doing is not okay, right? So I think there are times when I've said something or done something even when I was a kid, and when somebody pointed out, like, Sam, that's not okay, and this is the reason. Like, do you know that hurt so-and-so's feeling? And I was like, how could it hurt so-and-so's feeling? It's because when in this particular situation, when so-and-so said this to you, how did that make you feel? And then it's like, oh, okay. So do they understand how their behavior impacts other people? What is motivating the behavior? Are there friends? Are there peers that are emphasizing this? Or is there a group of friends that your child is hanging around that maybe are having difficulty like within themselves, they're fine, or sometimes even within themselves, they're kind of a lot of tension, but they kind of spill that tension out to other people. What other options do they have? Who else can they hang out with? What is it everywhere? Is it in some places? Do they accept responsibility? Oftentimes I work with kids, and I think one of the things I try to figure out is, like, are they able to say, yes, this happened and this is why it happened? Or are they kind of saying, oh, no, that's not what happened? And then, mind you, there's like video or there's like 5 different people saying, yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yet the child is up and down swearing that it doesn't happen. How do we address that? Like, what do we do? Like, we need to kind of understand where they're at with that. Do they blame others? Are they looking to blame other people? Are they saying, well, they deserved it, or they keep saying this to me and I don't like it? So and it's sad. I've been in situations where and I don't want to get too much into detail, but in situations where the other kid is having difficulty, and it's somewhat to a certain degree out of their control, and teachers are working with them, staff professionals are working with that particular child. But because that other child doesn't like the fact that other child is screaming, then all of a sudden now it becomes like, well, it's their fault. They need to stop. And it's like, okay, I know they need to stop, but you have to understand this is what we're dealing with. Let's come up with other strategies instead of doing what you're doing, because that can hurt other people. Right. And also that child, now I'm realizing that child is also having difficulty dealing with their own frustration, and how do we help them deal and learn about their own frustration and whatever is happening. And are they imitating others from school or home? Are they imitating things that they're seeing? I think sometimes we kind of downplay the things that are happening at home, or the way we react in certain situations, or the things that we do. And we want to be able to address that in a more direct way, or if there's certain things in you that you need to shift, so that way you can teach your child, yes, I want you to be resilient, but it is not okay that when I come home and I'm tired and I start yelling and doing this, I shouldn't do that. So I need to manage that, and then to have a conversation with your child and say, listen, I'm going to manage this, but at the same time, I want you to learn how to do the same. Okay, so if your child is bullying, don't panic, right? And if there's bullying behavior, if there's a serious situation, school is calling, all this other stuff, still don't panic. Find out what's going on, find out what's the situation is, and then work your way from there to figure out what to do next. Focus on positive communication, try to understand their point of view, but be concrete about your expectations. If there are things that are happening that are not okay, be concrete. Explain, like, okay, in this family, we don't, I understand that this person did this, but in this family, we don't really start to curse at other people or hurt other people or do things. And this is how we're going to help you do it, but this is an expectation moving forward. How do we help you make sure that you don't do this? And then seek additional support if it becomes more of an issue. So that's also something to be important. Like, and we'll get to that too. If things get really bad, really bad, right? And again, I could go into a million different type of scenarios, but there are times when you do have to go to the school. You do have to talk with the teacher. You do have to find out what's happening. Seek professional help. If your child is presenting depression or anxiety or refusing to go to school, it's okay to seek professional help. You could do all these things. Let's say you manage to do all these things and your child is still having a lot of difficulty, then it might be helpful to get help from somebody who like a therapist or other people, other resources. You might have friends or family that are really trusted that could step in and kind of say something or help that child through whatever is going on. You talk with the school administration, and again, not to kind of have them come down hard depending on the situation, but to be able to address it in hopefully a tactful situation, or to kind of, find out more information, or to sometimes even bring the teacher in to say, hey, I'm noticing that this thing is happening. Can you please watch out for this? So that way we could kind of help, we're working on these skills. Can you help reinforce these skills at school? This is what I'm hoping that we could do. And focus on self-care with you and your child. Teach them how to take care of themselves. Model positive behavior, model, even in the moments that we feel like are not paying attention. We could be on a really, annoying phone call with a customer service rep who doesn't understand the situation, and we're saying things that we shouldn't be saying, and we're doing it right in front of our kid. And then now, even though you're like, yeah, okay, they're talking to a rep, but then now they're learning, well, in order to solve problems, this is how intense you need to get. These are the things you need to say. And then it's like, you don't know when your child is doing the same thing, that you're like, oh, they're imitating what they see. So be aware of what you're doing, how you're doing it. And then if there's something that does happen, make sure that the child understands the context of why it happened, so it doesn't become something that they kind of emulate or imitate in one form or another. That was a lot of information, and I'm hoping to answer questions, but I do appreciate your time. Here are some references that I use for this presentation, and with the assistance of Tali Lesser, who's a Dr. Exern, who helped me put together some of this stuff. And you're not alone, you're not a bad parent, and we'll get through this. I just want to remind you of that all the time, right? And thank you very much.
It's a really good mantra. I appreciate that you always end the webinars with that. Why don't you go back up to I guess the slide has your email address on it too. I just want the resources to be available for people who want to copy it down or anything. Thank you so much, Sam. So much great information and lots of good questions. And I want to try and get to them all before we end at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
So one of our participants is asking about their young child who is 6. And, a lot of kids who are in the like 3, 4, 5, 6 range, they have a lot of problems with impulse control. It's just one of those things that is developing at that age. And so we have, especially in the toddler ages, we have biting, we have kicking. At what point does something, when you are 6, for example, at what point does something go from impulse control to maybe more like bullying? And then how do you help that kid to not do that anymore? What's the next best step for helping to cut down on those sorts of aggressive behaviors?
So I think when that happens, I think one is, again, understanding the context of in what situation it's happening. I think when I've talked to teachers or parents, I like to know, like, is this happening in the morning? Is this happening after lunch? Is this happening right before lunch? Is this happening with particular kids? Is this everybody? You know what I mean? And once you have a better context, then we could say, okay, what do we do next? Okay, and maybe we need to we could set up a reward system that could help with positive behaviors. Like, when we could kind of say, all right, here, you did a good job for this half an hour or 2 hours or whatever. Good job here. Let's, and I want to explain the reason why you're getting this prize is because you were safe and you had a safe body, and you use your words, and you did this and you did that, and that's amazing, right? And
very concrete. Yeah.
Very concrete. Right. And depending on the child, like there are some kids who I know, like they know, like you could go over it, like they'll say everything verbatim. And I was like, but what happened? He's like, I don't know. And they had the crayon and I wanted it. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, you don't know. So then I would say, all right, even though they're doing that, even though they understand, that we need to get more concrete. We need to say, okay, if that's what's happening, let's role play. Let's get you activated. So I even do activities where I'll tell parents, okay, like I want you to like, let's get excited, let's jump up, and then now you want the crayon, and then it's like, give me the crayon. It's like, no, all right. And then we kind of work through the whole thing, like, all right, this is what we're gonna do. Like now you're like, because now their heart is pumping, they're energetic, like they're like ready to go. And then now you can even see firsthand, they're like, they'll go from a kid who's like, oh, mommy, can I please have the crayon, to give it to me now. And then, and then you're freaking out, like, oh my God, who did I raise? And then how in that moment, you're like, okay, pause. Let's calm our body. Do you feel your heart now? Do you feel this? Do you feel that? Let's bring our energy down. And then you could I like to tell parents, and I tell this to all my parents, it is a marathon, right? It is never a short sprint. I think it'd be nice to say, hey, don't do that. And then the kid stops.
That'd be amazing.
Oh my gosh, right? You know, I think the only person that my dad did that to me, like, don't do that. And I was like, okay, all right, and that was it, right? But not everybody's like that, right? There are some kids who are do that and some kids no. If your kid is the type of kid that you could say that and it doesn't work, then now you have to start thinking about it. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. You're constantly teaching it. You're constantly, hey, did you have a safe body today? Did you have a safe body today? Oh, you're having trouble. What can we do differently? How do we do this? And if it's concrete issues, then we work on that. If it's impulsivity issues, then we have to figure that out. And then we could look at other strategies to do that. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you talked about the nuance of the behavior. I know you talked about that early in the presentation too, but just really understanding like at what point and at what time and under what context is this behavior happening, because we're always trying to find out what's the function of the behavior, right? What is the goal that the behavior is solving for you? And so can we substitute another behavior instead that will reach the same goal? And it's really helpful to be able to figure that out as you're narrowing it down for the kids so that you can give them those concrete sorts of instructions to say, when you want the crayon and you can't get it, let's try this thing instead.
Yeah.
Cool. There are a lot of questions about being more proactive so that bullying doesn't happen, or so that kids recover from bullying earlier. So like one thing that came up a bunch was how when kids don't tell their parents that bullying is happening, like that experience that you shared about your own childhood, how do parents know? And is there anything proactively that we can do to help kids to know that it is okay and that they should come and tell their parents when something bad is happening?
I think it's always tricky, right? It's never like I can't give a direct answer to that. But what I do think is this, right? Even if everything is going well, you should be paying attention to their mental health. And you should be paying attention to how do you want them to grow and how do you want them to develop and what experiences that you want them to have. So oftentimes, even in that situation where like if your child, like, you know, like for me, when I was thinking about that particular situation, when I left school, I was fine, right? I was like, oh, I left school, yeah, no, I'm happy. So I never thought about it until I walked into class. I was like, oh, this again,
this thing again, yeah,
right? But that was me, right? And I was able to kind of separate that from time to time, and there were still good days of the day or whatever, and so and only these short periods of the day that I was able to deal. But then there are other kids who don't have that ability. So if you're noticing that your child tends to bring things home, right, then we want to kind of address like what is that anxiety, right? Are they bringing like, it's not just, oh, I hate homework. Is it like, oh, I have so much homework to do. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So then if they're bringing things home, then we need to start working on like, let's talk about how do we deal with stress? Let's talk, how do we deal with stress? How do we deal with your frustration? Is there something going on in school? Like, let's talk about it. Let's like, sometimes it's good to kind of just create an open thing and just kind of let it go. Like every once in a while to say, hey, remember, you could tell me anything. This is safe zone right now. Tell me anything about your school. Even if they're like, everything is fine. Stop asking me that. You're weird. Cool. But then what happens is that you're building a foundation of letting them know that you're here and that you're here to help. And even if they won't say anything, that still doesn't mean, okay, all right, so you're not having a great day today. What can we do to help you feel better this week? Do you want to do something fun? Let's go do something fun. Would that be exciting for you? Oh yeah, I would love to like take a walk and get ice cream. And then you'd be surprised. I think a lot of parents come to me is like, they like when I ask them to tell me things, they won't say anything. But when we're just doing stuff, all of a sudden, I don't want to know. I'm just trying to enjoy my day. I mean, you do want to know, but you're like, that's not where your head is at. And then all of a sudden your kid is like, oh yeah, and by the way, I am getting bullied and I am this and that. And then now you're like, oh, and then your goal is to take it in stride, to hear what they're saying. And then from there to kind of say, okay, so do you want help with that?
Mm-hmm.
How do
And
we
not to have your own emotions swamp that conversation, right? Like you
exactly?
said, take it in stride and not be like, so
Yeah,
that then they feel like they have to manage you.
exactly.
Or sometimes parents inadvertently punish kids for telling stuff, where they
Yeah.
might say like, oh, well, finally you're telling me something about your day, or
Mm.
make some sort of snide thing that is unintentional, but makes it harder for them to come out with it later.
And that's a big thing. I think our reactions are important, and we have to learn how to like school that. Because how many times have I heard it where a kid says when they finally said something, and then the next thing that the kid says is, "You see, I should have never said anything."
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah. You want to
And
try and
that, and
avoid
in
that.
a moment that was supposed to be relieving turns into a
Mhm.
moment where they regret and they reinforce the idea of, you see, this is why I don't say things. So
Yeah,
we want to
that's a good
avoid that.
point.
And then the thing is that, and again, there might be times when you have to intervene, like something bad happened. You're like, whoa, this is not okay. And you might talk to another parent, like, yeah, everything is okay. And then later on, you're like, oh my God, do you think I should, like, did you hear what happened? Like, do you think I should do? And
Yeah,
then you kind of address like, all right. And then, hey, you remember when you told me what happened? And I know you're not going to be happy about this. I know you're going to tell me you should have never said anything, but this is one of those things I have to intervene because it's really about safety and I don't want anybody to
Mhm.
get hurt. And this is why, you see,
That's
and that's
great.
a
I
different
love
way to
that.
address it versus, you see, you should have said something like, and then now the ice cream walk turns into like the walk of shame or something. And we don't want
I love that. No, that's a really good response. So just in our last couple of minutes, another proactive sort of question is more about helping kids to build their own self-advocacy, their ability to stand up for themselves. How do you build those muscles in kids so that when they are in a bullying situation, they can stand up for themselves?
I think it's important to tailor whatever skills you want to build up for your kid based on what your kid personality, style, and abilities are. There are some kids who are quick-witted. So if something is happening, you tell them, all right, let's lean on that. Let's use that, right? You're like, so you said
Great.
things that it makes me look back like, ouch, like what did I do, right? So there are kids who are quick, there are kids who are not so much so, or they just, or they're quieter, right? So then my thing is that, well, I'm not going to say the same strategy that works for the quick-witted kid is not going to work for the other kid who's quiet and shy,
Yeah.
right? And then when we work through the different strategies, when we say, okay, what can we do differently, right? What can we do? What works for you? What do you, when so-and-so said this, when your brother said this to you, you know what really got under his nerves? Yeah, when you acted like he wasn't even there.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden he's like, "Ugh," and I was like, hey, sit down. And then everybody was fine, right? Because in that moment, and he's like, oh yeah, I did do that. I love it when he gets angry like that because he said something mean and I said that. And then now all of a sudden, even though they're not saying things back, but what they're doing is they're purposefully ignoring or they're purposefully doing a strategy that works for them, right? Lean
Great.
into their strength, right? If your kid is like very impulsive and very, okay, oh, they're doing that, change the subject on, right? Like, oh, they said something to me. Oh, you don't like this thing? Oh, okay. What about this? What about the ask a lot of questions? You could teach them how to do different things based on the strengths that they have. And then it's about being creative about it, right? So you're never going to get the perfect thing, but when you find the thing that works for you, it works. Like for me, it was like, oh, I learned how to become a little bit more wittier. I learned how to say certain things at the right time. I learned how to make jokes at my own expense, but also
Mhm.
make jokes around other people and still not make them feel bad.
That's great.
Right. And I had to learn
Great.
that skill over time. So it was a process.
Awesome. And of course, we're always here to help parents to learn those sorts of creative strategies and all that. And so everyone should feel free to reach out if you need tailored help. We are out of time. There are a lot of other questions here to be answered. And so if you do still have questions, please feel free to reach out to Sam or to me, Mandy at smallbrooklyn.com. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is our last webinar in our year series. And so please feel free to check out all of our other webinars that are on our Community Talks webpage to see the recordings of all of those. And, as I said, feel free to reach out at any time to Small Brooklyn Psychology so that we can help you as needed. And thank you to Park Slope parents for always supporting us, our webinar series, but also Brooklyn at large. And thanks to Sam for a great talk. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.